Beneath the fractured sky where ancient gods etched their hunger into the stars, and Omega's bare feet bled shadows onto the frost-kissed stone. The wind howled like a forsaken lover through the jagged peaks of the Iron Spine Mountains, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant thunder. Ilara's breath came in shallow gasps, each one crystallizing in the air before shattering against the relentless gale. She was no stranger to cold, born in the shadow of these eternal ridges where the packs of the north eked out survival amid blizzards that could bury a wolf alive. But this chill seeped deeper, into the marrow of her bones, as if the earth itself rejected her warmth. Her wrists chafed under the rough weave of hemp ropes, binding her to the procession that trudged upward toward the altar of echoes. The altar loomed ahead, a monolithic slab of obsidian veined with silver, hewn by hands long turned to dust. It stood sentinel over a vast plateau where snowdrifts swirled in ethereal dances under the bloated moon. Every decade the gods demanded their tithe, an Omega, pure of blood and unclaimed, to sate the old hungers that stirred in the void. Ilara had always known the tales, whispered in the longhouses during the long nights, when fires crackled low and elders spoke of the balance between pack and peril. But knowledge was a pale shield against the reality of it now, as the ropes bit into her skin and the weight of her fate pressed like an unseen hand on her chest. She was 24 winters old, marked by the moon's first blood at 13, yet untouched by any alpha's claim. In the eyes of her pack, the Silverfang clan, this made her vessel enough for the divine, or so the high priestess had decreed, her voice a serpent's hiss in the great hall 3 nights past. The gods grow restless, the woman had intoned, her fingers tracing the air as if weaving fate itself. The hunts fail, the borders fray with rival packs. Ilara, the unmarked, shall walk the path of offering. No vote, no plea. Rejection came not from a mate's disdain, but from the clan's desperate calculus, survival over sentiment. They had stripped her of her furs, leaving her in a threadbare shift that clung like a second skin to her shivering form, and marched her from the warmth of the longhouse into exile's embrace. The procession numbered 12, 6 warriors in cloaks of wolf pelt, their spears glinting like fangs in the moonlight, 4 acolytes chanting low invocations to the goddess of the hunt, and the priestess herself, her face obscured by a hood of raven feathers. At their center, Ilara stumbled over hidden roots, her bare soles numb against the frozen ground. The air tasted of iron and salt, blood from a ritual cut on her palm, dripping into the snow to mark the trail for whatever spirits might follow. But it was the pendant at her throat that anchored her thoughts amid the storm. A simple disk of polished hematite, etched with the crescent moon and handed down from her mother, who had perished in the last great famine. It hung heavy now, cool against her fevered skin, a talisman against the abyss. "Wear it always," her mother had murmured in her final breaths. "It whispers truths the gods fear to hear." As they crested the final ridge, the altar revealed itself fully, bathed in the moon's pallid glow. Torches flickered in iron sconces around its base, their flames dancing like captive souls, casting long shadows that twisted across the snow. The wind carried faint weavos from the valleys below, wolves calling to their kin, or perhaps the echoes of past offerings, souls unbound and wandering. Ilara's heart pounded, a drumbeat against her ribs, as the warriors forced her forward. She could smell the stone now, ancient and unyielding, laced with the faint metallic tang of old sacrifices. Her mind raced with fragments of memory, the warmth of the clan's hearth, the laughter of pups at play, the sting of isolation that had defined her years as the unmarked one. They had tolerated her, fed her scraps of duty, tending the wounded, weaving nets for the hunt, but never embraced her. An Omega without a bond was a ghost in her own life, and now she was to become one in truth. The priestess raised a hand, silencing the chant. "Kneel, daughter of the moon. she commanded, her voice cutting through the wind like a blade. Ilara's knees buckled on the icy surface, the cold seeping through her shift, numbing her thighs. The acolytes encircled her, murmuring prayers that blended with the rising gusts. One produced a chalice of hammered silver, filled with a viscous liquid that shimmered like liquid moonlight, mead infused with nightshade and blood to dull the pain and open the veil. Ilara's gaze fixed on the pendant, its hematite surface reflecting the torchlight in fractured stars. What truths did it hold? Her mother's voice echoed faintly. The gods take, but the moon gives back what is owed. As the chalice was pressed to her lips, the first drops bitter on her tongue, a distant rumble shook the plateau. Not thunder, but something primal, a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through the stone. The warriors tensed, spears at the ready, their eyes scanning the tree line, where shadows thickened unnaturally. The priestess faltered, her chant breaking. "The gods stir," she whispered, but fear laced her words. Ilara swallowed, the potion burning down her throat, igniting a strange fire in her veins. Her vision blurred at the edges, the world sharpening into hues of silver and crimson. The pendant warmed against her skin, pulsing like a second heartbeat. In that moment, as the wind whipped her hair across her face and the moon hung witness above, Ilara felt the rejection not as chains, but as a key. The gods demanded, the pack discarded, but within her stirred a whisper older than the mountains, a defiance born of blood and bone. The growl echoed again, closer now, and the air thickened with the scent of fur and fury. Something or someone was coming, drawn by the moon's unyielding call. And in the silence that followed, Ilara wondered if the gods had finally met their match. The growl swelled into a thunderous roar, shattering the fragile hush of the plateau like ice under a paw. Ilara's vision, still hazy from the potion's fire, sharpened on the tree line where shadows coalesced into form. A massive silhouette bursting from the pines, fur matted with snow, and something darker, steaming in the cold. It was no mere wolf, but a shifter in half-form, colossal and ragged, his flanks heaving with exertion. The warriors shouted, spears thrusting forward in a ragged line, but the beast— no, the man barreled through them with a ferocity that spoke of desperation, not conquest. One spear grazed his shoulder, drawing a spray of blood that arced crimson against the white drifts, but he barely faltered, his golden eyes locking onto the altar with a hunger that pierced Ilara's soul. The priestess recoiled, her chalice spilling its remnants into the snow where they hissed like venom. "Intruder! The god's right is profane to profane hands," she shrieked, but her voice cracked as the Alpha— for what else could he be, with that aura of command woven into his very breath, leaped the torch circle in a single bound. He landed mere feet from Ilara, his form shifting mid-stride, bones cracking and reforming under moonlit skin until a man knelt there, naked and bloodied, his breath ragged clouds in the frigid air. Broad-shouldered, scarred across chest and arms like a map of forgotten battles, he was the embodiment of the North's wild kings. Hair black as raven wings, falling in tangles to his shoulders, and eyes that burned amber, holding storms within. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning the acolyte's frantic chants. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the wind's bite, yet beneath it stirred something primal. An instinctive pull, like the moon tugging at the tide in her veins. She had heard tales of alphas, their sense a command that bent omegas to will. But this was no domination. His presence washed over her, carrying the musk of pine and iron-laced blood, mingling with her own ritual scent until the air between them hummed. The pendant at her throat burned hotter now, its hematite surface almost scalding against her chilled skin, as if recognizing kin in the chaos. He rose unsteadily, one hand clamped over a gash on his side where an arrowhead protruded, feathered black like a raven's wing. "The right ends," he growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone, echoing the distant uivos that now rose in chorus from the valleys. The warriors circled, but hesitation flickered in their eyes. This was no rogue. The air around him crackled with the weight of royalty, a king's mantle, torn but unbroken. "Thorn!" the priestess spat, her hood slipping to reveal eyes wide with recognition and dread. "Alpha King of the Iron Claw, you dare profane the altar of echoes? The gods will devour you for this blasphemy." Thorn's gaze never left Alara, those amber depths searching her face as if she were a riddle etched in starlight. Guilt shadowed his features, etching lines deeper than any scar, the mark of a ruler who had bent to duty's blade one too many times. "The gods are silent thieves," he said, his words measured, laced with a melancholy that tugged at Alara's heart despite the terror. "They take what packs offer in fear, but I come to shatter the chain." He extended a bloodied hand toward her, not in claim, but in plea, the gesture raw and unguarded. The wind whipped between them, carrying flakes of snow that melted on his fevered skin, and for a heartbeat, Alara saw not a king, but a man haunted, fleeing shadows of his own making. Curiosity warred with the fear rooting her to the spot. Who was he to challenge the ancient pact? The Silverfang had whispered of the Ironclaw King, Thorn Blackthorn, the melancholy sovereign, who had united the northern packs after the Blood Wars, only to bear the curse of a traitor's blade that twisted his veins with endless winter. Marked by guilt for the lives lost under his banner, he wandered borders now, a ghost in his own realm, they said. Yet here he stood, defying exile for her sake? The connection sparked unbidden, a thread of empathy weaving through the potion's haze. His pain mirrored her rejection, two souls adrift in the god's cruel game. But she denied it, shoving the warmth away. Trust was a luxury for the claimed, not the offered. The warriors lunged then, a blur of steel and snarls, and Thorn met them with a roar that shook the torch's flames. He wrenched the arrow from his side, blood pouring hot and dark down his abdomen, staining the snow in ritual patterns. One blade caught his arm, slicing deep, but he disarmed the attacker with a swipe that sent the man sprawling into a drift. Ilara scrambled back, her bound wrists scraping the obsidian, the pendant swinging like a pendulum between them. The priestess hurled a curse, her hands weaving shadows that lashed like whips, but Thorn batted them aside, his eyes flashing with an inner fire, not rage, but resolve born of long torment. In the melee, his gaze found hers again, a silent question amid the chaos. Run with me, or remain the god's pawn? Fear clamped her throat, but curiosity bloomed, treacherous and alive. The air thickened with the copper tang of blood and the acrid smoke of toppled torches, the moon bearing witness as Thorn fought not for glory, but for redemption's fragile spark. Alara's heart ached with the weight of it, his guilt a mirror to her isolation, pulling her toward the unknown, even as instinct screamed to flee. The pendant pulsed once more, warm as a lover's breath, whispering of fates entwined. As the last warrior fell, groaning in the snow, Thorn staggered toward her, extending that bloodied hand once more. The wind howled its approval. Weavos rising like a dirge, and in that suspended breath, Alara felt the first crack in her exile's walls. A connection forged in fear, denied by reason, yet undeniable as the moon's pull. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The snow clung to Thorn's wounds like a shroud, each flake a silent accusation as he knelt before Alara, his extended hand trembling not from cold, but from the raw edge of vulnerability. The plateau lay in disarray, torches guttering in pools of melted ice. Warriors sprawled like fallen idols, their breaths ragged plumes in the night. The priestess had vanished into the tree line, her raven hood a fleeting shadow swallowed by the pines, but her curse lingered in the air, a venomous promise of retribution. Alara's bound wrists throbbed, the hemp ropes slick with her own blood from the ritual cut, yet she did not pull away. The pendant at her throat hummed against her skin, its hematite warmth a counterpoint to the encroaching frost, as if it alone understood the precipice they teetered upon. "Take it," Thorn urged, his voice a gravelly whisper laced with urgency, those amber eyes holding hers with an intensity that stripped away the barriers of fear. Not a command from a king, but a plea from a man who had long outrun his own ghosts. Alara hesitated, her heart a wild drumbeat echoing the distant weavos that wove through the wind like threads of fate. Rejection had been her constant companion. The clan's indifferent gaze, the isolation of her unmarked years. But this alpha, this broken sovereign, offered not pity, but partnership in the storm. She placed her bound hands in his, the contact igniting a spark that raced up her arms, visceral and undeniable, like blood meeting blood under the moon's unblinking eye. He sliced the ropes with a shard of obsidian pried from the altar's edge, his touch lingering just long enough to steady her as she rose, legs unsteady from the potion's lingering haze. The world tilted, silver-edged and sharp, the snow underfoot crunching like brittle bones. "We cannot stay," he said, scanning the horizon where the tree line stirred unnaturally, shadows lengthening as if the gods themselves roused to wrath. "The Silver Fang will rally, and the priestess's whispers carry farther than the wind. They call it blasphemy, but it's the old pact that bleeds us dry." His words carried the weight of confession, guilt etching deeper lines across his brow. A king who had enforced similar rites in his youth, only to awaken to their hollow cruelty. Alara nodded, words failing her as curiosity morphed into a fragile trust. She followed him into the pines, the forest closing around them like a living shroud, branches heavy with rime that shed in crystalline cascades at their passage. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth and resin, undercut by the metallic tang of his blood trailing behind them, a crimson thread marking their flight. Thorn moved with the grace of a predator tempered by pain, his bare form a testament to haste, muscles corded and scarred from battles that whispered of betrayal and loss. She glimpsed the story in those marks, a jagged line across his ribs from a traitor's dagger during the Blood Wars, a puckered burn on his shoulder from a rival Alpha's fire ritual. Each one a wound he carried not as trophy but as penance, his melancholy a quiet storm that mirrored her own exile. They descended into a narrow ravine, the wind's howl muffled by sheer walls of granite veined with frost. Thorn paused at a hidden cleft, pressing a hand to the stone until it yielded, revealing a cave mouth veiled by hanging icicles like jagged teeth. "Refuge," he murmured, guiding her inside. The space unfolded into a natural chamber, its floor carpeted in soft moss dusted with snow, walls etched with ancient carvings, lunar phases and wolf silhouettes that danced in the flicker of light from a hastily kindled fire. He gathered dry tinder with efficient movements, striking flint against steel from a pouch at his belt, remnants of his king's garb long discarded. Flames bloomed, casting golden warmth that pushed back the shadows, illuminating his face in harsh relief. High cheekbones shadowed by stubble, eyes reflecting the fire like twin embers. Alara sank against the wall, the pendant cooling now against her chest, its pulse sinking with the fire's crackle. The warmth seeped into her chilled limbs, but it was his proximity that thawed something deeper, the ice of rejection cracking under the heat of shared peril. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice emerging hoarse, threaded with the vulnerability she had long buried. "You risk everything for an Omega the gods claim. Your pack, your crown." Thorn fed another branch to the flames, sparks ascending like liberated souls. "Because I know the taste of chains forged in fear," he replied, his tone measured, laced with a sorrow that tugged at her core. 10 years ago, I stood on a similar altar, not as offering, but as executioner. An Omega from a border clan, sacrificed to seal an alliance. I gave the order, believing its strength. But guilt is a slower poison. It hollows the soul until only echoes remain. He met her gaze, the firelight gilding his scars in amber. The gods take, but they leave us to bear the weight. When I scented your blood on the wind tonight, mingled with the ritual's call, it was as if the moon itself demanded I break the cycle. You are no pawn, Ilara. Your unmarked blood sings of something rarer, freedom unclaimed. Empathy bloomed in her chest, warm and treacherous, transforming the instinctive pull into a bond woven of mutual wounds. She saw him not as the Ironclaw king of legends, but as a man adrift, his ethical core rusted by duty's relentless grind. The cave's silence amplified their breaths, sinking like a ritual heartbeat, the distant weavos, a chorus, affirming their fragile alliance. Outside, the wind carried the faint clamor of pursuit, howls sharpened by anger, the snap of branches signaling the Silverfang's rally. Thorn rose, positioning himself at the entrance, his silhouette a sentinel against the night. "They come for us both now," he said, voice steady despite the blood loss paling his skin. "Enemy of my enemy, or perhaps something more." Ilara touched the pendant, its hematite surface smooth under her fingers, drawing strength from its whispered truths. The fire popped, sending shadows dancing across the carvings, and in that moment, amid the encroaching threat, she felt the first stirrings of Renascimento, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet choice to stand beside him. The bond deepened, empathy forging steel from shared pain as the Weavos grew nearer, a common foe binding them in the moon's unforgiving light. What was strength, if not choosing alliance over isolation? The cave trembled faintly with the earth's response, and Ilara knew their refuge was but a breath before the storm. The fire's glow etched fleeting constellations on the cave walls, where ancient carvings of lunar wolves seemed to stir, their stone eyes gleaming with secrets long interred. Ilara huddled closer to the flames, the moss beneath her a damp cradle against the chill that seeped from the granite like forgotten regrets. Thorn stood sentinel at the entrance, his silhouette a bastion of shadowed muscle and scarred resolve, the air around him thick with the copper bite of his wounds. The distant weavos sharpened, a cacophony of pursuit weaving through the ravine. Silverfang hunters, their fury a blade honed by the priestess's venomous decree. Yet within the cave's hush, a deeper tremor stirred, not from the storm outside, but from the pendant at Ilara's throat, its hematite heart now thrumming with an insistent rhythm, as if the moon itself had taken up residence there. She pressed a hand to it, fingers tracing the crescent etching, and felt a surge, not warmth, but a cascade of visions, fragmented and fierce, flooding her mind like blood spilling over snow. Images unbidden. Thorn as a younger king, crowned in the great hall of Ironclaw, his amber eyes alight with the fire of unity after the blood wars, then darkened by betrayal, a rival alpha's dagger plunging into the heart of his inner circle, the metallic tang of spilled loyalty staining the throne room floor. Guilt coiled through her veins, not her own, but his, echoes of the Omega he had condemned. Her final gaze a mirror of accusation that haunted his nights. Ilara gasped, the sound swallowed by the fire's crackle, her body arching as the pendant burned against her skin. No longer cool talisman, but conduit, awakening a gift she had never named. Thorn whirled at her cry, his face paling further in the firelight, blood from his side staining the moss in dark blooms. Ilara. His voice was a low anchor, laced with the melancholy that defined him, a king who bore duty's yoke like a crown of thorns. He dropped to one knee beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder, hesitant, as if touching might shatter the fragile bridge between them. The air hummed with their mingled scents, her ritual blood and wild herbs, his pine-laced fury binding them in the cave's intimate confines. Outside, the wind howled its prelude to confrontation, carrying the snap of branches and guttural snarls, but here, time fractured, the world narrowing to the pulse of revelation.
"It's you,"
Alara whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of sight beyond flesh. The visions sharpened, the gods' ancient hunger. Not divine but primal, a curse woven into the land's veins by the first shifters, demanding Omega blood to sate the void left by endless winters. But her blood, unmarked and pure, was no mere offering. It was the key, the Pathfinder's gift, hidden in her lineage, passed from mother to daughter like the pendant itself. "The gods aren't thieves of souls," she said, eyes locking onto his, silvered by inner light. "They're echoes of our fears, feeding on the pacts we forge in desperation. Your guilt, it's the chain that binds them. The Omega you sacrificed, she was like me, a vessel for this." Her hand clutched the hematite, and in that grasp, the cave walls seemed to breathe, the carvings illuminating faintly. Lunar phases glowing as if the moon had descended. Thorn's breath hitched, his amber eyes widening with a dawning recognition that cracked the armor of his melancholy. He had sought the altar not in blind heroism, but driven by fragments of prophecy whispered by his court's seers. A Redeemer Omega, born under the rare alignment of blood moon and solstice, who could unravel the gods' tithe and heal the North's fractured pacts. Yet he had dismissed it as fable, another layer of his self-imposed exile until now. "The pendant," he murmured, reaching out to brush her fingers, the contact electric, sending sparks through the air like embers caught in updraft. "Your mother's? It bears the mark of the first Omega, the one who silenced the void before the rites began. How did I not see?" Guilt twisted his features. Deeper now, not for past sins alone, but for the blindness that had prolonged the cycle. He was no savior. He was the wound, and she, the balm forged in rejection's fire. The revelation crashed over Alara like a blizzard's embrace, her body shuddering as the gift fully manifested, a clairvoyance tied to the moon's phases, revealing destinies etched in blood and bone. She saw their paths converging, Thorn's crown, tarnished by betrayal, restored not through war, but through her unclaimed light. The Silverfang priestess, a puppet of rival alphas hungry for Ironclaw's throne, twisting the god's myth to fuel political games. The pendant pulsed brighter, its crescent glowing faintly, casting prismatic shadows that danced with the fire's flames. Pain lanced through her temples, the vision's intensity a visceral storm, but beneath it bloomed power. Her exile no curse, but preparation, the unmarked years honing a spirit unbound by bonds. Thorn drew her closer, his arm encircling her shoulders with a tenderness born of awe, the heat of his body a shield against the encroaching cold. "You are the key," he said, voice rough with emotion, the ethical core of him alight with hope, tempered by sorrow. "Not to my redemption alone, but to ending this. The god's silence will come through you, through us." Yet doubt flickered in his eyes, the weight of his past a shadow that resisted the light. What right had he, stained by Command's blood, to claim such destiny? The bond between them deepened. No longer mere empathy, but a spiritual tether, her gift illuminating his guilt as the lock to their shared fate. The Weavos crested then, perilously close, the ravine's mouth echoing with the clamor of foes, warriors and shadows conjured by the priestess's arts. Thorn rose, pulling Alara to her feet, the pendant's glow fading to a steady ember against her chest. Revelation had armed them, but the storm demanded proof. Would her sight guide them through betrayal's labyrinth, or would it demand a sacrifice to silence the ancient hunger? In the fire's dying light, as blood and moonlight mingled on the cave floor, Ilara felt the moon's whisper, Destiny was no gentle guide, but a blade that cut both ways. Strength lay not in foresight alone, but in choosing to wield it amid the gathering dark. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The ravine's mouth spat them into the open maw of the night, where the moon hung like a severed eye, its silver gaze piercing the swirling snow. Alara's breath burned in her lungs, each step a defiant pulse against the frozen earth, the pendant at her throat a steady thrum syncing with her racing heart. Thorn moved beside her, his wounds seeping fresh crimson trails that steamed in the cold, marking their path like accusations etched in blood. The Weavos had multiplied, a savage symphony rising from the tree line, no longer distant echoes, but the thunder of the Silverfang pack closing in. Their fury a living storm laced with the priestess's shadowed incantations. Betrayal hung in the air, thick as the metallic tang of impending violence, and Alara felt it coil in her gut. Not just pursuit, but the unraveling of her past, the clan's rejection clawing back to claim its due. They crested a ridge of jagged slate, the Iron Spine Mountains unfolding below in a labyrinth of shadowed valleys and ice-veined cliffs where torchlight flickered like predatory eyes. Thorn halted, his amber gaze sweeping the horizon, the melancholy lines of his face hardening into the mask of a king reborn to battle. "They've allied," he growled, voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of foresight earned in blood. "The priestess serves not the gods, but Riven, my old rival, the Shadow Claw Alpha who plunged that dagger in the blood wars. He twists the rights for his throne, using your sacrifice to fracture the north." His hand found hers, calloused fingers intertwining with a grip that spoke of anchors in tempests, yet Alara felt the tremor there, the ethical fracture of a man who had once wielded power without mercy. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, the pendant igniting like a forge in her chest, pulling threads from the ether. Riven's sneer in the throne room, his blade slick with the blood of Thorn's trusted beta, the Omegas sacrifice a pawn in their endless game of crowns and curses. Guilt surged through her, borrowed from Thorn's soul, his past a mirror to her exile, both forged in the fires of necessity's cruel algebra. The wind whipped her shift against her skin, carrying the acrid scent of smoke and fur as the first howls crested the ridge behind them. Shadows erupted from the pines. Silverfang warriors, a dozen strong, their cloaks ragged banners in the gale, eyes gleaming with fanatic zeal. At their fore rode the priestess on a spectral steed of mist and bone, her raven hood thrown back to reveal a face twisted by dark arts, veins pulsing black under translucent skin. And flanking her, massive and scarred, was Riven himself, Alpha of the Shadow Claw, his pelt a mottled gray that blended with the storm, eyes like coals in the void. "Ilara!" the priestess shrieked, her voice a lash across the wind, laced with the venom of shattered rights. "Unmarked whore, you flee the gods' embrace? Return, or your blood will paint these stones for all packs to see." The warriors fanned out, spears and claws extended, their breaths clouds of rage that mingled with the snow. Riven dismounted with predatory grace, his form shifting to man shape, broad and hulking, a scar bisecting his muzzle like a usurper's grin. "Thorn, Blackthorn," he rumbled, his tone a mockery of brotherhood, dripping with the poison of old betrayals. "You steal what is owed to the balance? After all these years, still chasing ghosts of your failures. That Omega you slew. Her spirit cries for your head, and now you compound it with this one." Thorn stepped forward, shielding Alara with his body, the heat of him a bulwark against the encroaching frost. Blood dripped from his side, pooling at his feet in ritual sigils that the moon seemed to trace with light. "The balance is a lie you peddle, Riven," he replied, his voice steady, threaded with the sorrow of a king who had tasted power's bitter dregs. "You whisper to the priestess of divine hunger, but it's your ambition that starves the north. I ended that right once in my folly. Now I end it in truth." His eyes met Alara's over his shoulder, a silent communion, love or freedom. The bond between them thrummed, visceral as the wind's bite, her gift illuminating the crossroads. Forgive the past's architects, or wage war that would drown the mountains in blood? The priestess laughed, a sound like shattering ice, and hurled a bolt of shadow from her palms, coiling tendrils that lashed toward Thorn like serpents. He met it with a roar, claws extending as he shifted partially, batting the darkness aside in a spray of ethereal shards. The warriors charged then, a blur of fangs and steel crashing against the ridge's edge. Alara's world narrowed to the chaos. Snow churned to crimson slush under paws, uivos blending with guttural cries, the air thick with the reek of sweat and spilled life. Thorn fought like a tempest contained, disarming two foes with sweeps of his arms, his scars glowing faintly under the moon's caress, each strike a measured ethic, disable, not destroy, mercy amid the fray. But Riven circled, his form a shadow among shadows, waiting for the moment to strike at the heart. Alara's pendant burned, visions assaulting her. The choice crystallized, Riven's blade at Thorn's throat, the north fracturing into endless war if she unleashed her full sight, revealing the traitor's hidden allies in every pack. Or forgiveness, expose the lie without slaughter, binding the packs in truth, but at the cost of her freedom, tying her light to Thorn's shadowed crown. Love pulled at her, a tide of empathy for the man who had shattered her chains, his guilt a wound she alone could salve. Yet liberty whispered of the wild unknown, unclaimed and unbound, the Omega's rebirth beyond any Alpha's shadow. Pain lanced her temples as she clutched the hematite, its crescent searing like branded fate. The moon above fracturing through storm clouds like a goddess's fractured vow. Riven lunged, his claws raking Thorn's back in a deep furrow that sprayed blood across the snow, the king staggering but not falling, his amber eyes flashing defiance. "Yield, brother!" Riven snarled, the word a twisted jest from their shared youth in the wars. "Or watch her bleed as the last tithe." Alara stepped forward, the wind tearing at her hair, her voice emerging not as plea, but command, amplified by the pendant's fire. "Enough!" The word echoed, rippling through the melee, warriors faltering as her gift unfurled. A wave of clairvoyant light that pierced the shadows, revealing Riven's deceptions. Bribes to Silverfang elders, forged prophecies to fuel his rise. The priestess recoiled, her illusions crumbling like ash, exposing the rival's hunger for dominion. Thorn whirled, bloodied but unbowed, his gaze locking on hers amid the suspended breath. The pack encircled them, breaths heaving, the ridge a tableau of frozen violence under the moon's indifferent watch. War or pardon? Her heart tore, the moral blade cutting deep. Love demanded union, a shared throne of redemption. Freedom offered solitude, the wind's endless call. Blood pooled at their feet, mingling hers and his, a symbolic vow the earth drank greedily. What was strength, if not choosing compassion over conquest, even as the storm raged? The uivos fell silent, the night holding its breath, as Ilara faced the abyss of decision, the pendant's whisper urging her toward the precipice where destiny and desire collided in fire and frost. The ridge trembled under the weight of revelations, the snow absorbing the echoes of Alara's command like a parched earth drinking absolution. The warriors froze, their spears lowered in the wake of her light, a radiant veil that peeled back the shadows, exposing Riven's web of deceit in stark, unforgiving clarity. The priestess crumpled to her knees, her raven hood pooling around her like spilled ink, veins of black magic receding as the illusions shattered. Riven's form recoiled, his scarred muzzle twisting in a snarl that bared fangs yellowed by ambition's rot, but the fire in his coal eyes dimmed, recognition of ruin etching his features. The wind howled its judgment, whipping flurries that stung like needles of truth, carrying the mingled scents of blood and betrayal across the iron-spine peaks. Ilara stood at the precipice, the pendant searing her skin like a brand of destiny, its hematite crescent pulsing with the moon's borrowed fury. Visions cascaded through her, futures branching like frozen rivers, war's crimson flood swallowing the north in endless vendettas, or a fragile peace forged in the crucible of mercy, her light binding the packs not through chains, but through unveiled hearts. Thorn's blood mingled with hers on the slate, warm rivulets tracing sigils that the moonlight gilded in silver, a silent vow between exile and crown. His back bore fresh furrows from Riven's claws, crimson weeping against the pale expanse of his flesh, yet he turned to her, amber eyes holding not command, but a quiet plea. The melancholy of his guilt laid bare like an open wound. "Ilara," he murmured, voice rough as gravel under frost. "The choice is yours. I have wrought enough shadows. Let your light decide if redemption can thaw this frozen age." Her heart fractured under the moral blade, love's pull a tide dragging her toward union, the shared throne where his ethical core could mend under her gaze, their bond a cure for the gods' hollow hunger. Yet freedom whispered of the wild solitudes beyond, the unmarked Omega reborn in the wind's embrace, unbound by any king's shadow or pack's decree. Rejection had been her forge, honing a spirit that needed no claim to blaze, but in Thorn's eyes she saw her own isolation reflected, mirrored in the sorrow of a sovereign who had sacrificed too much to duty's altar. The air thickened with the pack's suspended breaths, Weavos fading to a distant dirge. The moon fracturing through storm clouds like a goddess witnessing her children's reckoning. Blood's copper tang laced the gale, mingling with pine and the faint, acrid smoke of dying torches below, every sense alive with the precipice's vertigo. Riven lunged once more, desperation twisting his form into a blur of gray fur and rage, claws extended for Thorn's throat. But Ilara stepped forward, the pendant erupting in a blaze of inner light that spilled from her chest like liquid moonlight, enveloping the ridge in a dome of ethereal silver. The vision solidified, not as weapon, but as revelation's flood. Images assailed the gathered wolves, Riven's bribes to elders, his forged scrolls twisting the gods' myths into tools of conquest. The true curse, not divine but mortal, born of the first pack's greed during the endless winters. "See," Ilara's voice rang out, amplified by the hematite's fire, resonant as a temple's bell. "The gods do not demand, we do. Our fears feed the void, but compassion can silence it." The warriors gasped, eyes widening as truths pierced their zeal, spears clattering to the snow in waves of dawning horror. Riven staggered, the light coiling around him like chains of his own making, forcing him to his knees amid the crimson slush. "Lies!" he roared, but his voice cracked, the Alpha's facade crumbling under the weight of exposed sin. Thorn advanced, not with claws, but open hand, his wounds steaming in the cold, the ethical heart of him prevailing over vengeance's lure. "Brother in blood, if not in spirit," he said, tone laced with the sorrow of lost kinship. "Yield the shadows, the north bleeds no more for your crown." Riven's form shuddered, the fight ebbing as the pack turned, their howls shifting from fury to a mournful chorus of awakening. The priestess wept, shadows dissolving from her skin, her fanaticism revealed as Riven's puppetry. Ilara's choice crystallized in that suspended breath, union, not as surrender, but as rebirth's forge. Love was no reward, but proof, the redemption of a king through an Omega's unyielding light, silencing the ancient tithe not with sacrifice, but with truth's blade. She reached for Thorn, her fingers intertwining with his bloodied ones, the contact a spark that healed more than flesh, his guilt uncoiling like frost under dawn, her exile transforming into purpose's mantle. The pendant cooled against her chest, its glow fading to a gentle ember, the moon above steadying as if the goddess herself exhaled in relief. The light receded, leaving the ridge bathed in natural silver, snow pristine once more, save for the mingled blood that the earth absorbed like a sacred oath. The packs knelt then, Silverfang and Ironclaw alike, their submission a tide turning from war to alliance, the gods' hunger quelled by the revelation of mortal folly. Riven bowed his head, chains of frost binding his wrists, not magic, but the weight of his deeds, led away by former foes now guardians of a new pact. Thorn drew Alara close, his breath warm against her temple, the melancholy lifting like mist burned by inner fire. "You have silenced them," he whispered, voice thick with awe and the quiet joy of absolution. "Not with my crown, but with your heart." Their bond sealed in that embrace, a union of equals, king and omega, wound and healer, under the moon's benevolent watch. The wind softened to a caress, carrying uivos of unity across the peaks, the Iron Spine Mountains reborn in the hush of redemption. In the days that followed, the altars crumbled to dust, the rites dissolved into legends of warning, and Alara walked beside Thorn not as claimed, but as partner, her Pathfinder's gift guiding the north toward winters of plenty. Rejection had been the seed. Love, the bloom that proved strength, lay in Mercy's choice. The pendant hung serene now, a symbol of fates entwined, whispering that every Omega carried a light to heal a king's shadow, and every shadow yielded to the moon's grace. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.